You know that incredibly common experience where you're staring up at a sky full of clouds and at first it's just this random fluffy mess?
Right, yeah.
But then, almost involuntarily, your brain just sort of clicks, and suddenly that amorphous blob isn't a cloud anymore. It's like a ship or a face or a dragon.
Oh, exactly. It's a well-documented psychological phenomenon called pareidolia.
Right.
Our brains are essentially wired to aggressively hunt for patterns in, visual and auditory chaos. We have this fundamental inability to tolerate a void.
We just demand a story.
Yes.
So today we are welcoming you to another deep dive into a stack of sources that takes that exact human impulse to map the chaos around us and stretches it across two incredibly different worlds.
Very different worlds.
Yeah, because at first glance, the materials we're looking at today seem, well, completely unrelated. On one hand, we have this dense, brilliant PhD dissertation analyzing the ancient Roman statesman Cicero and his obsession with the stars.
Right. And then on the other hand, we have modern audio materials from a community project in Wakefield, England. It's called Story Trails, and it focuses on interactive local folktales.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because how do a murdered Roman politician and a tiny mythical creature called a bogle end up in the exact same conversation?
It sounds like a stretch.
Right. But stick with us, because our mission today is to explore that profound urge to make sense of the universe through storytelling.
Exactly.
Whether you're an ancient Roman searching the constellations for a message, or, a modern child listening to a folktale on an antique telephone, we are constantly trying to decode the noise of our lives into a narrative we can actually survive.
And I think the best place to start is with the original canvas for human storytelling, which is the night sky.
Right, the ultimate blank canvas.
Yeah, but to truly understand the Roman mindset, we actually have to do a quick experiment on our imagination.
Okay, I'm ready.
You have to completely forget everything you know about modern heliocentric astronomy.
Done.
And you have to step back into the ancient two-sphere model of the universe.
Oh, right. So picture the Earth sitting completely still, heavy, immovable, just dead center in the void.
Yes, the anchor.
And wrapped around it are these concentric, invisible spheres holding the planets, the sun, and the moon, all just rotating independently.
Right, and enclosing all of that, like a giant bubble, is the final, ultimate outer shell.
The fixed sphere.
Exactly, where all the constellations live. And this outer shell revolves around the Earth once a day. But the crucial takeaway here is that this model represented absolute, predictable order.
It wasn't random.
No, not at all. For the ancients who believed in this, the universe was not a terrifying infinite vacuum. It was a highly designed, enclosed mechanical system.
And that idea of a design system gets, well, deeply fascinating when we look at how the poets of the era actually wrote about it.
Oh, for sure.
The sources introduce us to Aratus, who was a Greek poet from the 3rd century BCE, and he wrote this massively influential poem called The Phenomena.
Which is such an important text.
Yeah, and Aratus portrays a universe ruled by Zeus, but this is a stark departure from the older myths.
Right, because if you look at Hesiod, an earlier Greek poet, his version of Zeus is just, he's angry, capricious, and secretive.
Just a totally punitive god.
Exactly. He actively hides things from mortals, like punishing humanity by withholding fire. But Aratus presents a completely different cosmic architect.
A nice guy, Zeus.
Basically, yeah. His Zeus is benevolent, and most importantly, he is communicative. He actively leaves signs for humanity embedded in the weather and the stars.
So it's like being dropped into a massive escape room, but the game master genuinely wants you to win, so he's just leaving clues everywhere.
That is a great way to put it, yeah.
And this is where our man Cicero enters the narrative. Because long before he was a famous statesman trying to save the Roman Republic, a young Cicero decided to translate Aratus's poem into Latin.
But he doesn't just translate it word for word.
No, he gives the sky this massive dramatic overhaul.
He really does.
Yeah.
Cicero takes the relatively static, descriptive Greek astronomy of Aratus and just injects it with a beating heart.
Right.
He takes isolated dots in the sky and turns them into a cosmic theater.
Because, in the original Greek version, you have the constellation of the Hare, just sitting there under Orion's feet, perpetually being pursued by the dog star, Sirius.
Like, it's a very dry positional description.
Exactly, just coordinates, basically. But Cicero takes those dots and writes a thriller. His hare isn't just sitting, it is light-footed and utterly terrified.
It's actively fleeing.
Yes, fleeing the horrible bites, the horrificos of the dog star. And Orion the Hunter isn't just standing there holding a club. Cicero describes him as crazed and out of his mind.
He weaves panic and speed and violence directly into the fabric of the heavens.
It's like taking a dry technical manual and turning it into a high-stakes survival narrative.
Totally.
But let's pause on Cicero's motivation here. Why put so much effort into this? Because Rome was facing massive earthly political problems.
Oh, absolutely.
So why was an ambitious young politician writing, like, action-packed fan fiction about a space rabbit?
Well, the historical context is essential here. Rome was entering a period of intense political instability.
The social wars, right?
Yes, the social wars, the rise of dictators, life on the ground was incredibly chaotic and violent.
So looking up was an escape.
More than an escape, it was a psychological anchor. By specifically framing the stars as a place of emotional drama that still operated within an ultimate predictable order, Cicero is building a uniquely Roman universe.
Wow.
He's signaling that even if the heavens are filled with terror and pursuit, they still follow a divine, rational plan.
And because Cicero and Aratus viewed the entire universe as this divine system of signs meant to be decoded by humans, they decided to actually mirror that universe in their own storytelling.
Yes, the codes.
Right. They embedded literal signs and codes within the text of their poetry.
The textual semiotics here are just incredibly layered. Like Cicero opens his Latin translation with the phrase A-I-O-V-E, meaning from Jove or Jupiter.
Okay, so A-I-O-V.
All right, look closely at those first 5 letters. He manages to align all the primary vowels of the Latin alphabet right at the start of the poem.
See, honestly, my first reaction to reading that was that Cicero was just showing off.
Oh, totally.
It feels like an arrogant flex, right? Just, look how clever I am with my vocabulary.
On the surface, it definitely looks like a parlor trick. But Roman philosophers took this deeply seriously.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Later thinkers, like Lucretius, would explicitly compare the letters of words, the elementa, to the literal atoms of the universe.
Wait, atoms and letters?
Yes, just as physical atoms combine and recombine to build worlds and trees and people, vowels and consonants combine to build texts.
Oh, wow.
So by aligning those vowels, Cicero is establishing himself as the divine creator of this textual universe. He's laying out his building blocks.
Well, he certainly loved a good code. Because the original Greek poet, Aratus, had hidden the word elauthi in his poem by creating an acrostic, reading down the first letters of consecutive lines.
Right, which means slender or refined, signaling his sophisticated style.
Exactly. And so Cicero answers this by hiding the Latin word zona in his section describing the zodiac.
And zona means belt or girdle, which physically represents the band of the zodiac wrapping around the cosmic sphere.
So deliberate.
And beyond the acrostic, Cicero takes it a step further by deliberately correcting the Greek term.
Oh, the translation shift.
Right. Zodiac literally means circle of little animals. But Cicero renames it in his Latin translation as the orbum signiferum, the sign-daring circle.
He's really just hitting the reader over the head with the theme. Like, the universe is throwing signs at you and the text is throwing signs at you.
Exactly.
But I have to push back on this entire approach to storytelling. Because hiding an acrostic in a dense poem feels incredibly elitist.
It does.
Does making the audience work so hard to decode a puzzle actually serve the story, or does the gimmick just sort of get in the way?
Well, that tension brings us directly to the modern materials we're looking at today. The Story Trails project in Wakefield.
Ah, yes.
Bethy Dye created this interactive installation called Hello, Can You Hear Me? She gathered 10 local folktales from the community and loaded them onto a vintage rotary telephone.
But she didn't just put a play button on the phone. She broke the stories into disjointed parts.
Oh.
Listeners have to physically pick up the receiver and dial different numbers to find the fragments.
It takes actual effort.
Yeah, and depending on what they dial, they can create their own story mashups, jumping from a local ghost story to a myth about a tiny creature.
And this is the exact same mechanism Cicero was using. The cognitive friction is the entire point of the exercise.
But how does making someone struggle with a clunky rotary phone improve the folktale?
Because when you passively consume a story, say you're just watching a movie or listening to a straightforward audio track, the narrative simply washes over you. You're a spectator.
Right.
But when you introduce a barrier, when the audience has to hunt for the zona acrostic, or physically dial a heavy rotary phone to track down the next chapter of the Horbury Bogart, you force them out of a passive role.
They have to engage.
Exactly. They transition from a consumer into a co-creator of the myth.
So you're saying the physical act of dialing makes them emotionally invested?
Precisely. They are participating in the architecture of the narrative. For Cicero's audience, Recognizing the acrostic meant you were actively participating in the divine rationality of the cosmos.
Wow.
And for the Story Trolls audience in Wakefield, dialing the phone connects you physically and mentally to the history of your own community. You're not just hearing the story, you're building it.
Okay, so we have this beautifully constructed concept of an ordered universe full of divine signs and interactive stories. What happens when a rival thinker looks at that beautiful architecture and decides to burn it to the ground?
Well, that is where Lucretius enters the historical record.
Because if Cicero is painstakingly building a divine narrative, Lucretius arrives to write the ultimate philosophical diss track.
Oh, 100%.
Lucretius authors this massive poem called De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things. And he's a hardcore Epicurean.
And Epicurean philosophy is fundamentally opposed to everything Cicero was building.
Right.
For Lucretius, the universe is not ordered. There is no intelligent design. There's no communicative, benevolent Zeus leaving us breadcrumbs to decode.
None of it.
The universe is entirely random, consisting only of atoms and void, colliding in the dark for eternity.
And the way he attacks Cicero's worldview is just masterful literary warfare. He doesn't just write an essay arguing against Cicero's points.
No, that would be too simple.
Right. He steals Cicero's beautifully coined Latin vocabulary to dismantle the argument from the inside. Like, remember that phrase Cicero invented for the zodiac?
Orbum signiferum, the sign-bearing circle?
Exactly. Lucretius lifts it completely. He uses Cicero's exact phrase, but instead of using it to describe a divine system of messages meant for humanity, he uses it to explain a purely mechanical, random, soulless, celestial mechanism.
He hollows out the magic of the word.
It's like taking the stained glass windows from a sacred cathedral and using them to build a sterile, fluorescent-lit science lab.
That's a perfect analogy. And the most striking part of this rivalry is how they handle the imagery of the night sky.
The lucubratio, or night-working motif?
Yes.
Cicero wrote these gorgeous, sweeping lines about standing outside on a serene night, nocte serena, looking up at the magnificent sign of Orion, feeling a deep spiritual connection to the divine plan of the cosmos.
And Lucretius steals that exact imagery.
Word for word, almost.
He writes about noctes vigilare serenas, staying awake through the calm nights. But he isn't looking for gods.
No.
He's staying up all night studying physics, desperately trying to find the words to cure mankind of their superstitious dread.
It is a devastating philosophical reversal, but we need to examine Lucretius's underlying motive here.
Right, because he isn't tearing down the story to leave humanity feeling cold or abandoned in a meaningless void.
Even though it sounds like it.
Yeah, he's actually trying to offer them profound psychological relief.
But stripping away the idea that the universe has a grand plan feels incredibly bleak. How does that offer relief?
Well, put yourself in the shoes of an average person in the ancient world. If the stars are literal gods and every natural event is a divine sign, then a sudden thunderstorm isn't just a weather pattern.
Right.
It is Jupiter threatening to strike you down for something you did wrong. An eclipse is a terrifying omen that the gods are furious and your nation is about to be destroyed.
So the pressure was immense.
The story of the universe was often incredibly traumatic and punitive. By proving that the universe is just atoms and void, Lucretius is offering a radical comfort. He's saying, the stars aren't watching you, the gods aren't judging you, you can finally stop living in constant terror of the sky.
He's essentially arguing that the best story to survive the chaos of life is no story at all, just hard, cold science.
Exactly.
What is so compelling about this clash of ideas is that whether you believe the universe is a divine poem like Cicero or a random machine like Lucretius, the sheer act of translating these concepts into a narrative has massive practical power in the real world.
And that practical power is really the focus of Cicero's later work, De Republica on the Commonwealth.
Right.
The text establishes this brilliant philosophical tension between what we can call the horizontal and the vertical planes of human existence.
Okay, so the horizontal plane is earthly politics, the active daily life. It's worrying about laws, treaties, the economy, and, the fact that the Roman Republic is actively collapsing.
Very horizontal problems.
Right, and the vertical plane is astronomy, stargazing, the contemplative life.
Yes, and in the dialogue, a character named Laelius represents the horizontal perspective. He looks at the other politicians gathered around him and voices a frustration that sounds incredibly modern.
Very relatable.
He basically asks, why are we sitting here talking about the astronomical phenomena of two suns appearing in the sky when we literally have two political factions tearing our Senate apart?
No.
Who cares about the stars when Rome is burning?
We hear that exact argument in modern political discourse all the time. Why are we funding space telescopes when we have so many problems on Earth? But another character, Philus, counters him. Philus uses the story of Archimedes' mechanical sphere, which was an early orrery, like a physical model of the planets.
And Philus makes a pivotal argument. He asserts that understanding the vertical, the macro-level mechanics of the universe, has direct, life-saving applications for the horizontal world.
It's not just useless stargazing.
Right. To prove it, he tells a historical story about a Roman statesman named Gallus at the Battle of Pydna.
So the Roman army is camped out in the wilderness the night before a massive high-stakes battle. And suddenly, a total lunar eclipse plunges the camp into darkness.
And the troops absolutely lose their minds.
Completely panic.
The historical texts note they were overcome by religione to a paralyzing mixture of superstition and fear. To an ancient soldier, the moon disappearing before battle was a horrific omen of imminent slaughter.
Right, they thought they were doomed.
The entire army was essentially immobilized by panic.
But Gallus, however, understands the vertical. He has studied Archimedes' sphere, so he stands up in front of this terrified, heavily armed camp and gives them an impromptu science lesson.
He replaces their terrifying myth with a rational narrative.
Exactly. He explains that the eclipse is just the Earth's shadow, that it happens at predictable intervals, and that it has absolutely nothing to do with angry gods predicting their deaths.
Gallus essentially weaponized astronomy. He took the terror of the unknown void and replaced it with a structured, rational story. He gave the soldiers a framework to process their overwhelming fear.
And it worked. The army recovered its nerve, marched out the next day, and won the battle.
And thousands of years later, the Story Trails Project in Wakefield is doing the exact same thing for a modern community.
It really is. Gallus used the cosmos to calm an army, and Betty Dye uses local folklore to help a town process its own chaos.
The underlying function of both narratives is identical. In Wakefield, the stories loaded onto that rotary phone aren't just lighthearted fairy tales. The project tackles some very heavy, dark local history.
Like the story titled The Witch and the Haunted Hill.
Right. That narrative deals directly with Mary Pannell, a real woman from the area who was executed for witchcraft in 1603.
That is a brutal piece of community trauma. How does turning her execution into an interactive folktale help anyone process it?
Because history in its raw form is often too chaotic or painful to absorb.
Right.
By translating Mary Pannell's tragic reality into a folktale, the community is building a container for the trauma. Just as Gallus gave his soldiers a scientific framework to process the terrifying eclipse, Story Trails gives Wakefield residents a narrative framework to acknowledge and hold their dark past without being destroyed by it.
Wow. And then on the other end of the emotional spectrum, the project features a story called Hope Travels, which follows a tiny mythical creature called a boggle trying to navigate the overwhelmingly massive human world.
And a tiny boggle trying to survive in a giant world is the ultimate scale model of what it feels like to be a human being trying to navigate an infinite universe.
It really is.
Whether you're dealing with a macro narrative about the zodiac, or a micro narrative about a local witch, or a tiny bogle, these stories serve the exact same psychological function. They shrink the terrifying expanse of reality into a shape we can hold in our hands.
So does the strict factual truth of the boggle matter? Absolutely not. What matters is how that story helps a kid in Wakefield survive the horizontal earthly chaos of growing up.
Exactly.
What matters is that we dial the phone or we map the stars, and we feel tethered to something that makes sense.
It is the human coping mechanism operating at its absolute highest level. We translate the infinite into the intimate.
Oh, I love that.
Cicero looked at a terrifying, politically unstable Rome, and his response was to look up and write a story about a universe perfectly ordered by a divine mind, where even a frightened space rabbit has a defined path.
And Lucretius looked at that exact same sky, saw the terror that religious superstition was causing on Earth, and wrote a poem about beautifully random atoms to set people free from fear.
And Bessie Dye looks at the isolation of modern life and puts fragmented voices on an antique telephone so people can physically pick up the receiver, engage with the mystery, and feel connected to the history of their neighbors.
The sheer scale of the universe changes depending on who is looking, but the human necessity to map the void never does.
Never.
We've traced an incredible line today, starting with the grand two-sphere model of the ancient cosmos, exploring Cicero hiding secret acrostics in his Latin poetry, examining Lucretius tearing down the divine plan with Epicurean physics, and landing on a period rotary telephone playing fragmented folklore in modern Yorkshire.
It's a huge journey, but the mechanism remains constant. We're always searching for the signal in the noise.
Always. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Think about the digital screens you stare into every single morning and night, your phone, your laptop, your television. In a very real way, those screens are our modern night sky. They are vast, infinite spaces filled with millions of points of light and endless streams of data.
Just like the ancient Romans looking at the stars, we are staring at those glowing points of light, desperate to find a pattern.
So the crucial question is this. Are you just passively letting the algorithm draw the lines for you? Are you simply letting the machine feed you its prepackaged constellations?
Or are you actively searching for the hidden acrostics?
Right. Are you putting in the cognitive friction to dial the numbers, mash up the stories, and actively write your own meaning into the static?
Because if you don't take the time to map the chaos will eventually map you.
Pareidolia isn't just a quirky trick of the visual cortex, it is an essential survival tactic. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking up, keep looking closely, and keep actively searching for those hidden signs in your own world. Catch you next time.